And Prime Minister Mark Rutte of the Netherlands has said that his country is considering sending a Patriot missile system to Ukraine.
To the war in Ukraine now, and the Netherlands and Denmark have both said today that they are sending F-16 fighter jets to Kiev.
Moscow expected the air war to become cheaper over time. Instead, it just became harder to sustain. The Netherlands moved $500 million into a NATO weapons pipeline that feeds Ukraine directly from American production lines, and that decision reshaped the economics of Russia's missile campaign overnight. This wasn't a press conference gesture or a symbolic transfer of aging inventory. It was a structural commitment that binds Ukraine's air defense to a procurement system built to move interceptors and munitions in weeks rather than political seasons. That shift matters because Russia's strike doctrine depends on strain. Its planners design attack packages to compress defensive reaction time. Drone waves draw attention, while cruise missiles adjust trajectory and ballistic threats complicate timing. The objective is saturation. When defensive capacity feels thin, small errors create disproportionate damage. The Dutch just reinforced the layer that prevents that damage from compounding. The funding runs through NATO's prioritized Ukraine requirements list, PURL, a fast-track mechanism that converts urgent Ukrainian requests directly into US-sourced deliveries without stalling in prolonged intergovernmental negotiation. Equipment moves from inventory and production queues into Ukrainian hands on timelines measured in weeks. Speed alters calculation. Russia expanded drone production to multiply pressure. Pressure becomes leverage when interceptors thin out or when cities endure repeated disruption without rapid recovery. Sustained resupply weakens that leverage before it matures. The Netherlands did not enter this framework tentatively. It had already injected a previous €500 million tranche into PURL in 2025, becoming the first NATO state to activate it at scale. That payment sat inside a broader multi-year pledge worth several billion euros, written into forward planning rather than treated as emergency spending. Embedding support into budget cycles signals durability Moscow cannot ignore. Inside the current tranche sit Patriot missiles and components sustaining the highest tier of Ukraine's air shield. Those interceptors are tasked with neutralizing the most dangerous incoming threats aimed at population centers and energy infrastructure. Ukrainian officials have stated that additional Patriot capacity remains essential to manage the scale and complexity of Russian strike patterns. Each funded interceptor narrows the margin Russian planners rely on when allocating missiles to a wave. The package also moves artillery ammunition and F-16 munitions through the same channel. That coherence prevents fragmentation in supply. Fragmentation breeds hesitation, and hesitation creates openings. Russia's air campaign aims to exhaust premium defensive munitions ahead of decisive moments. Lower-cost threats trigger early launches. Compressed reaction windows increase the odds of breakthrough. Depleted top-tier interceptors invite follow-on strikes. By reinforcing high-end resupply while maintaining depth across other munition streams, the Dutch intervention stabilizes the internal hierarchy of Ukraine's defensive grid. Short-range systems manage low-altitude threats, while high-end interceptors remain focused on complex cruise and ballistic attacks, keeping rear areas shielded as the front holds. Hierarchy suppresses chaos, and chaos is central to Russia's winter strategy. Winter amplifies disruption because infrastructure damage carries social and political consequence beyond the blast radius. Energy failures in cold months resonate across households and institutions. Darkness becomes narrative. By accelerating interceptor flow ahead of peak seasonal pressure, the Netherlands reduced the likelihood that a single coordinated strike cycle achieves disproportionate psychological effect. When visible impact declines, internal confidence shifts, altering escalation decisions and compressing stockpiles without restoring strategic leverage. This moment is not about headline numbers. It is about who dictates the cost curve of the air war. Through a procurement mechanism engineered for continuity rather than spectacle, the Netherlands just bent that curve away from Russia's preferred direction. And that was only the first layer of the move, because the Dutch did not stop at feeding interceptors into the system. They began reinforcing the machinery that allows Ukraine's air power to endure. The second move didn't arrive as a dramatic battlefield moment, but it changed continuity. The Netherlands confirmed it will transfer F-16 flight simulators to Ukraine under the Denmark-Netherlands-Norway coalition. That sounds procedural. It isn't. A simulator is time. Time to rehearse complex missions without burning fuel, exposing aircraft, or risking pilots in contested airspace. At this level, air power is not measured by ownership. It is measured by sortie sustainability. Ukraine already has F-16s pledged and partially delivered. Maintenance contracts extend through Belgium for years. Ammunition flows through the same procurement channel, reinforcing air defense. Together, that forms something Russia cannot easily fracture: an ecosystem. Without simulators, training cycles stretch and adaptation slows. With them, pilots refine coordination before takeoff, adjust tactics in controlled environments, and move replacements through the pipeline faster. That compression matters. Russia's air strategy depends on exploiting transitional vulnerability. When new systems enter service, Moscow probes for misalignment, tests coordination under pressure, and searches for mistakes created by rushed integration. The Dutch just narrowed that window. The Ministry of Defense in The Hague declined to disclose locations or numbers tied to the simulators. That restraint signals operational value. You do not obscure classroom infrastructure unless it affects battlefield output. The F-16 in Ukrainian service is not positioned for symbolic duels in open skies. It expands defensive geometry, strengthens interception coverage, and deepens coordination between radar networks, ground batteries, and airborne assets. None of that functions without fluency. Fluency takes repetition. Simulators accelerate it. Moscow can target hardware, but it cannot easily strike competence built behind secured doors. The Netherlands framed this as part of a longer arc. Defense Minister Ruben Brekelmans connected the simulator transfer to earlier Dutch drone and ammunition deliveries while describing support levels as embedded in national budget planning rather than temporary emergency measures. That framing carries weight in Moscow. Kremlin planners track fiscal durability and political stability, searching for signs that commitment might thin once headlines fade. Embedding support into multi-year structures communicates something harder to intimidate. It signals posture rather than reaction. For Russia, that complicates calculation. The air campaign is built to grind endurance. It seeks to outlast replacement cycles and stretch adaptation until fatigue sets in. The Dutch intervention accelerated those replacement cycles, and that acceleration does not stop at the runway. Because while interceptors shield cities and simulators strengthen aircrew competence, another Dutch decision targeted the pressure point Moscow returns to every winter: electricity. Missiles are loud, blackouts are quieter. Russia understands the difference. A destroyed substation generates headlines. A hospital losing power in January raises a deeper question: how long can this continue? That question is what Moscow has tried to weaponize. In early February, the Netherlands added 35 million euros to the Ukraine Energy Support Fund, bringing its total contribution to 100 million. The allocation targets rooftop solar systems for critical infrastructure, especially hospitals. That geometry changes the equation. A centralized grid presents large, high-value targets. A distributed system absorbs impact differently. When generation exists at the point of use, disruption narrows. Surgical wards remain operational. Intensive care units continue functioning. Coordination does not collapse with a single strike. The psychological return shrinks. Russia's winter strike model relies on cumulative darkness. It counts on repeated infrastructure damage to extend beyond the battlefield and into domestic morale. That pressure becomes strategic when it reshapes public confidence. Distributed resilience interrupts that cycle. This funding does not transform Ukraine into an energy exporter. It hardens essential nodes against cascading failure. When the next coordinated strike wave lands, the absence of dramatic civilian collapse becomes strategically significant. International pledges to the Energy Support Fund now exceed 1.8 billion euros. Within that pool, the Dutch contribution carries disproportionate weight relative to national size. The Netherlands is positioning itself as a structural stabilizer. Structural stabilizers frustrate attrition. Russia retains the capacity to damage generation and transmission assets. Yet replicating nationwide shock becomes harder when resilience spreads outward from centralized nodes. That forces recalculation. Moscow's winter calculus depends on predictable amplification, infrastructure strike, visible hardship, political tension. When hardship remains contained, amplification weakens. This is where the Dutch pattern converges. Air defense reduces incoming damage. Pilot training compresses adaptation cycles. Energy resilience absorbs what penetrates. Layered denial removes clean outcomes. Clean outcomes sustain inevitability. The Netherlands just disrupted inevitability across airspace, training architecture, and the power grid. That convergence reshapes expectation inside Moscow. When pressure stops expanding its influence, it loses strategic weight, and pressure without expanding influence becomes noise. Noise does not bend wars. This is where the decision stops looking financial and starts looking strategic. The Netherlands does not control NATO's largest arsenals, yet it has embedded itself inside Ukraine's defensive architecture in a way that compounds over time. For 2 years, Russian planning has rested on a long horizon assumption. Western unity would thin under economic strain, and political turnover would introduce hesitation. That assumption faces friction. Dutch support was not structured as a seasonal surge. It was written into forward fiscal planning tied to air defense sustainment, F-16 ecosystem reinforcement, and infrastructure hardening. That coherence matters more than the headline amount. $500 million flowed through PURL after an earlier injection activated the mechanism. Multi-year pledges anchor continuity. Ammunition supply aligns with pilot training cycles. Energy hardening synchronizes with anticipated winter pressure. When support behaves as architecture rather than reaction, exploitable seams shrink. Russia's strategy benefits from episodic assistance that creates visible gaps. Gaps invite concentrated pressure. Concentrated pressure produces spectacle. A synchronized supply framework denies spectacle before it scales. Escalation paths now carry heavier trade-offs. Increasing strike density accelerates depletion rates. Expanding drone saturation risks diminishing psychological return. Attempting to fracture alliance cohesion through rhetoric may reinforce it instead. Each option introduces cost without guaranteeing leverage. The deeper shift lies in absorption. Reactive support restores balance after visible damage. Structural support reduces the visibility of damage before it compounds. Absorption reshapes tempo. When interceptors arrive predictably and training cycles proceed without interruption, the narrative of inevitability erodes. Russia's air campaign has always aimed to project inevitability. Contained outcomes weaken that projection. The Netherlands inserted itself into containment. This does not remove Moscow's ability to strike. It reduces the expected strategic return from striking. And return defines escalation logic. Wars at this stage hinge less on sudden breakthroughs and more on which side can absorb sustained pressure without fracturing internally. By reinforcing Ukraine's continuity across air defense, air power development, and energy resilience, the Netherlands positioned itself inside that absorption dynamic. The difficulty for Moscow lies in the absence of a clean countermeasure. Hardware can be targeted. Procurement architecture tied across allied production lines cannot be erased with a single strike. Budget commitments embedded in national planning do not dissolve under rhetorical escalation. That asymmetry compounds quietly. A country of 17 million people just reinforced Ukraine's resilience in a way that accumulates rather than spikes. If future strike waves produce less visible disruption than anticipated, the explanation will not be traced to a single interception or sortie. It will trace back to structured endurance replacing reactive urgency, and structured endurance extends the timeline Russia once expected to compress. At this stage, the Kremlin faces a narrower corridor than it did a year ago. Expanding missile output increases industrial strain and accelerates depletion rates, maintaining current tempo risks, diminishing visible impact if defensive depth continues to thicken. Seeking leverage through rhetoric risks consolidating the very alliance cohesion Moscow hoped would erode. None of those approaches restore the psychological momentum that winter blackouts once provided. The Netherlands did more than allocate funds. It reinforced the connective tissue between production lines, training cycles, and infrastructure resilience. That connective tissue makes attrition harder to weaponize. Russia's long-term strategy has relied on exhausting its opponent's patience. Exhaustion requires visible strain. Visible strain requires repeated disruption that accumulates rather than dissipates. When disruption loses cumulative effect, the exhaustion model weakens. Interceptor deliveries that remain steady reduce shock value. Pilot training that proceeds without interruption reduces vulnerability windows. Distributed energy resilience limits the symbolic impact of infrastructure strikes. Pressure that fails to expand its influence becomes background noise. Noise does not compel political shifts. The strategic question now shifts from capability to payoff. Russia retains the ability to launch missiles and deploy drones. The uncertainty lies in whether those actions still generate the leverage required to bend negotiations or fracture support. If leverage declines while cost remains constant or rises, escalation becomes a less attractive instrument. The Netherlands did not deliver a dramatic battlefield reversal. It altered the environment in which future Russian decisions will be made. By embedding Ukraine more deeply into NATO's logistical bloodstream, it extended the timeline over which Moscow must calculate. Extended timelines amplify cost, and when cost accumulates faster than leverage, strategic confidence erodes. That erosion may not be visible on a map tomorrow. It becomes visible when successive strike waves fail to reshape political will. At that point, the fork becomes unavoidable. Continue investing resources into a campaign with shrinking return, or adjust strategy under the weight of a war that refuses to exhaust its opponent on schedule. The Netherlands just made that dilemma sharper, and sharper dilemmas are harder to ignore.